Yesterday, somebody asked me what my take was on who was behind the mass migration of non Westerners to Western countries. It's not an easy question to answer, but this morning, a friend of mine in real life, not over the internet, but in real life, asked me my opinion on the New Zealand stabbing at the grocery store, the Islamic extremist that went on a stabbing spree in a New Zealand grocery store the other day. Well, I'm going to try and merge the two. One of the biggest players in the Islamification of the West is, interestingly enough, Catholics and the Catholic Church. But the thing is, what you have to understand is who controls policy in the West, and especially in the United States, is not one specific group of people. Okay? It's a whole bunch of different groups of people and individuals with their own agendas that sometimes coincide with each other and sometimes don't. But for the most part, it's random groups of individuals. Some have more power than others. And as Ragnar Redbeard pointed out in Might Makes Right, those with more power obviously have more say in what happens in the real world. So a lot of the policy fluctuates based on who has the power. And a lot of ways to get the power is by marketing oneself as a special interest or a corporate interest or etc. That's how the gays are gaining power, is by showing themselves as a special interest group that has the power of the voting public behind them. That's the same thing that happened with abortion rights and things like that, is when it's seen that if the politicians favor this group or that group, it helps them maintain power. That's what they aim to do, because you have to understand, the politicians understand that in order to control the people, you need the people's consent. And that's never changed. It's very hard to rule a non-consensual people. Now, I'm going to get into how. Now, first, let's talk about Catholicism and Islamification. Everybody knows the Catholic Church was behind the Crusades. A lot of people don't know about the Franciscan Order. The Franciscan Order was founded by Saint Francis of Assisi, who is the saint that Pope Francis took his name after. And in the United States, a lot of liberal Catholics, because that's most Catholics in the United States are liberals, were saying things like, oh my God, he took the name of Saint Francis, he's going to be a vegetarian, he's going to care about the poor, he's so liberal. Oh, okay. Yes and no. I do believe I actually do not think Pope Francis is a terrible pope. I think some of the things, like he tried to crack down on the homosexuality amongst the clergy, but was shot down by the cardinals and things like that. And again, you have to remember, the Pope is not the Vatican. That's a big thing that people, it's like the president is not the United States. Okay, the president is not the Congress, the Senate, and everything else. And it's the same thing with the Pope and the Vatican. Okay, so the Pope is not the Vatican. There are some very positive things about Pope Francis and some very negative things about Pope Francis. While he was in the United States, I thought it was very thoughtful of him to meet with a Protestant woman that refused to marry a couple gays and lost her job for it. Okay, so you do have positives in Pope Francis, which I believe are more so on a personal level, less on a professional level. So I do see positives in Pope Francis. But I think one of the reasons that he took the name of Saint Francis of Assisi wasn't because of his love of animals or his love of the poor, but his love of Islam. And it's not a love of Islam as in a love of Islam for the sake of loving Islam. It's a sake of loving Islam for the power it could theoretically give the Catholic Church if they merged, like Saint Francis of Assisi wanted to do with the 99 names of God and things like that. He wanted to Islamify the Catholic faith, and the Franciscan order is an Islamified order of Catholicism, but it would give power that the Catholic Church, like, you have to understand, the merging at the time of the Crusades, if the Catholic Church had merged with, say, the Islamic world, that would be like the United States and the USSR, or the United States and Nazi Germany uniting. Like at the height of Nazi Germany, if the United States united with Nazi Europe, or at the height of the Cold War, if the United States and the USSR said, you know what, screw this stuff, we have more similarities than we do differences, let's work together to lift the world up. And I don't think that the Catholic Church views themselves as a negative force. I think it's very rare that you'll find anybody view themselves as a negative force. I mean, I don't think that the world is full of mustache-curling supervillains thinking that, oh, I'm going to rule the world and destroy everybody, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, I don't believe that that's how things work, but what I do think you have is you have, for example, right now, again, who's behind immigration? Well, let's not look at the United States anymore because it's too late for the United States. We already know what's going on in the United States. Let's take a look at Latin America. Okay, Latin America has had infiltration by radical Islam. You have a lot of people converting to Islam in Latin America, such as the Mapuche people and the Rapa Nui people. The Rapa Nui, in case people don't know this, the Mapuche people are a group of indigenous people, indigenous to Chile, Brazil, and Argentina. They seem to be in relation to, indigenous hunter-gatherers from that area. And I'm going to get into why this is important to humanity, why Islamification of these people is bad for humanity. And I'll get into that because I have a great interest in medical anthropology. But essentially, what you see is a turn towards the Catholic Church encouraging mass migration of other people into other places. For example, Chile, the Catholic Church was very much behind the infusion of Afro-Caribbean people, primarily from Haiti, into Chile for their own purposes, okay, which was the purpose of re-Catholicizing the region. Because you have to understand, this is also why the Catholic Church wants Latin Americans to be infused into Anglo-America, is to re-Catholicize, to regain the power that they're constantly losing in Anglo-America due to their bad behavior. But what the Catholic Church didn't think of, and I've made previous videos of this, is when Catholics are given a reasonable alternative to Catholicism, whether it's the Mennonite religions or the Protestant religions or Mormonism or things of this nature, when Catholics that are from these more primitive cultures in Latin America, when it's brought to their attention that there are other less sexually deviant, less hypocritical branches of Christianity, they readily convert to these forms of Christianity. However, there is the other aspect that once you read the Quran, and I've read the Quran, I've read the Bible, I've read the Torah, and the thing is, the Quran, if you're going to be honest as a Christian, the Quran makes more sense than Christianity does as Christianity. The Quran is against the idea of a Trinitarian idea, which is from the Council of Nicaea, this whole idea of the Trinity, which is not mentioned in the Bible. It's also against the worship of Jesus Christ. It sees Jesus as a prophet, not as God himself, which goes more toward the teachings of Christ in the Bible. So when you are raised in a very Christian mindset, and then you are there's two ways of looking at religion. There's the religion of the religion, and then there's the culture of the religion. And if you are a fervently religious person, not culturally minded, but religious, and you are given other, I don't want to say facts, because religion is not factual, but when you're given a differing point of view that seems to agree more with the narrative of your religion than your religion does, you tend to question your religion and sometimes convert to that new religion. In this case, you see a lot of Latin Americans and indigenous people from Latin America converting to Islam because the narrative of the Quran fits the teachings of Christianity better than Christianity does. And this is bad for the security of the region, and I'll explain why. And it's bad for humanity from a medical anthropology standpoint and an anthropology standpoint, and just the fact that we will lose a lot of material human culture, a lot of material reality that says these people lived here and these people did this, if it plays out like it has in Afghanistan, if it plays out like it has in Iran, if it plays out like it has in other regions of the world that have become Islamified. And the reason I say this is you see the destruction of the Buddhas in Afghanistan, you see the suppression of Zoroastrian religious adherents in Iran and Afghanistan. You see the oppression of women, you see the oppression of indigenous customs in these regions of the world. The Persian culture is not really, has been suppressed by Islamic culture, which is not Persian, technically. Okay? Persian culture, of course, predates Islam, because Islam is younger than Christianity, and Persian culture is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, civilized cultures on the face of the earth. I mean, Babylon, I believe Babylon, as far as we know, maybe it's Sumer, but I think Sumer, if I remember correctly, Sumer is Babylon. Sumer became Babylon. But the Sumerian and Babylonian cultures, which became Persian cultures, they are, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the oldest agricultural and therefore civilized cultures on the face of the earth. And the suppression of these cultures by the Islamification of the people is not good for humanity. Generally speaking, it destroys what we are capable of knowing. And with the Mapuche and Rapa Nui people, particularly the Mapuche, I don't know much about the Rapa Nui, but in relation to things like ethnobotany, which is very important in discovering new medicines and things like that, ethnobotany might save our asses come the time of vaccine and antibiotic-resistant viruses and bacteria. It may be ethnobotany, the botany of the indigenous peoples of the world, that ends up saving humanity. And the Mapuche are, bearers of this knowledge, which will be suppressed probably as some kind of witchcraft or something like that. I mean, the Mapuche have already dealt with the suppression of their indigenous beliefs by the Christians, and it will be far worse under Islam. I mean, and as I've pointed out in my previous video, you're talking about people that already dealt with the Spanish Inquisition against them for practicing indigenous beliefs. You're going to see that yet again. There's not much difference between the Spanish Inquisition and the way militant Islamists enforce law. So again, what you see is the Catholic Church celebrating this diversification of the Western Hemisphere, whether it's in Chile, where the infusion of Afro-Caribbeans caused massive spikes in crime. It destroyed the social welfare system of Chile. And it completely devastated Chile to the point where Chile began paying these Haitians to please go home. Just go back to Haiti. Here's money. Go back to Haiti. Just don't come back for 3 years. And that's how bad it got. When that is the solution to your problem, that you're just going to pay people to leave, it's a problem. But this, if you watch the video, the Al Jazeera video, which is about this in the description, in the description, follow all the links in the description. You'll see that I'm not making this stuff up. This is all true. But if the only solution for the Chilean government was to just pay these people to go away, this is not good for the Western Hemisphere. And you see this being celebrated by the Catholic Church. You also see the Catholic Church. Now, I'm not one way or the other on that gentleman. What's his name? Evo Morales, I believe his name was, the guy from Bolivia. I don't think one way or another on that guy. I'm not a big fan of the Pachamama, but I do think that indigenous beliefs need to be preserved because they can be, as odd as this sounds, I believe indigenous beliefs need to be preserved so they can be exploited by civilized humanity. Simply because, like, I'm not a big fan of Pachamama, but I'm a bigger fan of Pachamama than I am Gaia theory. But Evo Morales, who is the socialist president, or communist president, I mean, he gave Pope Francis a cross that was the hammer. It was a crucifix made out of the hammer and sickle. It leads you to wonder where these people's values are, okay? And I have no doubt in my mind that Pope Francis is at his heart a communist. Now, that doesn't mean I'm against, as people know, I call myself a communist with U.S. values, for a good reason. Now, the thing is, with Evo Morales and all this, the Organization of American States, I don't know how true this is, I haven't really looked into it, but I know the Organization of American States said that he was fixing the elections, and that's why he kept winning, and then he took refuge in newly socialist Argentina under, what's his name, Alfredo, por favor, now what the hell's that guy's name? Alberto Fernandez, because Alberto Fernandez is now friendly towards these communists all throughout Latin America, and you're seeing more and more countries be swayed to this concept, which makes them sitting ducks for Islamification, because they're so concerned about the minorities and minority rights and da-da-da-da-da, and then they're going to come into our country, please come into our country. And for nations with a high Arab population like Argentina, now they are pretty mixed up with the general population, but Argentina does have a fairly high Syrian population already and a fairly high Muslim population. So you're going to see an influx of people's relatives into that area, and you may see it, and also Brazil has a high Islamic population. A lot of these countries have fairly high Islamic populations. And you will see with these more liberal governments, you will see an embrace of these people, and these people will take advantage of this embrace like they have in the United States. And they will use this to start gaining footholds in politics and other areas where they can start causing real social, cultural, and material damage to these countries. And people don't understand this. A lot of people question my views on Pan-Americanism and why do I have these views. It's because Pan-Americanism makes sense. The regional stability of this continent or continents makes sense. It always did and it always has. But the problem is, by the United States not spending its time, think about it, we could have had a United States of the Americas if we had concentrated our immense power and immense technological strength to these two continents, North and South America. We could have seen the creation of a united Americas. that would have dwarfed anything else in the world as far as prosperity, technology, stability. You would have seen a great path forward, similar to the concepts laid out in the cosmic race, but more so the concepts laid out by progressives like Teddy Roosevelt and new nationalism and things like this. You would have seen a new world that was far, far superior to the old world. Not that it's not already, but you would have seen something very, very more similar to where we should be now, as opposed to where we are now, hiding from an invisible enemy, as Trump would say. So I think what people don't understand is the sensibility of Pan-Americanism is important, but two of the biggest threats to Pan-Americanism, which cannot be dealt with like this because you risk alienating a large portion of the population, particularly of Latin America, but the two of the biggest threats are the Catholic Church and the liberalism of the Catholic Church and the promotion of egalitarianism by the Catholic Church and the pushing of egalitarianism and the pushing of the influx of foreigners into the Americas by the Catholic Church. That's a big problem. And then you also have the problem with radical Islam coming in. And creeping, it's a creeping pestilence into the United States. And a lot of people are going to get mad at me because this doesn't follow the narrative of many nationalists, okay? And I'm going to leave a link to a lot of Stephen Steinleit's articles. And this is also another reason I support Pan-Americanism and I support the cosmic race. One group of people that constantly get blamed for mass immigration, which were at one time, remember, the shape and face of who controls our policies in the West changes like the tides. So yes, there was a group of people that was mostly responsible for the immigration policies, and they still have a lot of teeth, and they have a lot of skin in the game. And that group of people, we all know who they are. They're the kind of little tiny hat. They wear it. They wear it to temple on Saturday. The little tiny hat. The tiny hatted people, we'll call them for now. But what it is yes, they have had and do have a huge stake in U.S. foreign policy and in U.S. immigration policy, as well as in the immigration policies of a lot of these Latin American countries. People don't understand that the tiny-hatted people make up a large portion of the powerful people in a lot of the Latin American countries, and they fiddle with Latin American politics as much, if not more, than they do with United States politics. But it pales in comparison to the Catholic infiltration of these things. And the other thing that you need to understand is, and you will see when I leave the links to Stephen Steinleit's articles at the Center for Immigration Studies, they're afraid of the unification of Anglo and Latin America. And one of the biggest reasons they're afraid of it is the Latin American people are not brainwashed. They're not guilty. They're not guilt-ridden people. Castizos and mestizos, they're not full of guilt and self-hatred like Anglo-Americans are. They're not going to bow to the tiny-headed people. They're not going to do that. They won't kneel before the tiny-headed people. So if you see Stephen Steinleit's articles, you will see the real fear that they have of the Latin Americans. And especially of Latin Americans coming in and taking their positions in government. And they will, because Latin Americans are going to vote for Latin Americans over the tiny-headed people. They're going to, obviously, Now, I also want to get into this when people say that, well, Catholicism will protect Latin Americans from radical Islam. No, and if people remember Jose Padilla, the one dude and they were pronouncing it Padilla, which will show you how quickly our country has become, the culture of our country has become changed, because back in the early 2000s, people were still pronouncing double L's as an L sound, like Jose Padilla instead of Jose Padilla. Luckily, most people could pronounce tortilla chip by then. But there were still some people, and probably still are, in some of the more rural parts of this country that still say tortilla chip, which is humorous. But my point is anybody that's as old as I am has no excuse to forget about Jose Padilla. Jose Padilla was an Islamic radical of Mexican origin, I believe, Mexican American origin, that was radicalized and had constructed a device that he was going to detonate that would have been bad news for us Americans. And we need to, through the Organization of American States and diplomacy, the United States and other large players in Latin America, such as Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, they need to act firmly against radicalization of the continents, because it's a real danger. It's a real danger. And if you don't think, this is the thing, we already have narco-terrorism in the Americas. What do you think will happen if certain organizations, like some of these Latin American street gangs and stuff, become Islamified? Imagine that. Then you have radical Islamic Latin American street gangs all throughout the continent. And these gangs already control large swaths of whole towns in the United States and also throughout Latin America. So, of course, obviously dealing with the gangs is important, but also dealing with radical Islam and radical Islam's encroachment into the continents is important. It's also important to eventually find a way to be open and honest about the role Catholicism is playing in the destruction of the Western Hemisphere, because it is. The Catholic Church is a pestilence on the Western Hemisphere, either through the child sex trafficking and sexual abuse stuff, or through the protection of pedophile priests, or for the promotion of the influx of all of these non-Westerners into the Western Hemisphere. The Catholic Church is by far the biggest and worst player, and the biggest potential adversary against the Western values and the Western way of life. And that's something that has been overlooked by everyone, because everyone is a complete idiot, basically. And everybody doesn't want to think that Christians, now remember, Catholicism is not Christianity. Catholicism is Christianized paganism. It is Roman paganism that has been christened by the influence of Christian philosophies and such, but it is ultimately, materially speaking and culturally speaking, it is Roman paganism. And if you look at Catholicism throughout the Americas, you will see a lot of the influence of the various pagan cultures, whether it's the Aztec and Zapotec and Inca and the Native American cultures, which are merged with Catholic doctrine, or even in Haiti, where you see Western African beliefs like voodoo being merged with Catholicism. And these people are all considered equally Catholic. Remember, Catholic means composed of many bodies, or composed of many churches. And that's what you need to keep in mind. I believe everybody should start reading Martin Luther's Theses. I believe it's very important that people awaken themselves to the danger of Catholicism and the danger it poses through the Islamification of Catholicism and the pathway that it is for the corruption and destruction of the Western Hemisphere. And that's all for this video. Oh yeah, follow the links in the description. Follow all the links in the description. Read the links, understand the links. Now you know who's somewhat behind the immigration policies of the United States. I also left a link to Kennedy's 1965 immigration reform, because prior to that, the United States had an immigration policy that kept the country ethnically like me. Okay, and you have to understand, one thing that you need to understand is most countries have the sense like Mexico and a lot of these other countries, they have, and Argentina. I know because I've looked into how to immigrate to Argentina. They don't want people that cannot be easily assimilated. The 1965 Immigration Act, which was by a Catholic, by the Kennedy family, by a Catholic, okay, it worked to destroy the continuity and homogeneity of the United States and caused for more and more and more and heavier influx of people from parts of the world that would make the United States more heterogeneous and give the liberals a bigger voting base. And again, now that's all for this video. Check the links in the description.